All right, you guys, we are back. We are just starting to figure out a name for this show or this segment. I am Courtney. This is Ricardo Zavart. Am I pronouncing that right?
Sevart. You said it right. You got it. You got it. You can.
And yeah, you can find obviously my channel is Willows Bloom, and then
And I've just launched a new YouTube channel with a new name called The Infinite Soul, SOL for soul. Ricardo Zevart Astrologer, and you can find me on YouTube and Instagram and in the link below.
I also just rebranded my podcast and I named it Astrology is Real. I don't know why. I just couldn't get that out of my head. So if you want to listen to these things on a podcast version on iTunes, Spotify, you can check those episodes out there. Today is a really exciting episode.
Oh, yeah.
And this is in honor of Valentine's Day as well as the Mars and Venus conjunction that we just had on 2/16.
I could also say Mars, full moon in Leo, kind of open up the heart centers and stuff like that. But yeah.
So if you haven't gathered, it is an episode around love and relationships, and we're specifically centering this around Venus in our chart. So today we're going to be talking about what Venus is as a planet, why we should be studying it at all, and what it means for men and for women, because it differs a little bit. And we'll also break it down in terms of the signs and maybe the houses. I'm not sure.
I don't know about so much of the houses, but definitely talking
Definitely
about
the
just like
signs.
when Venus is in a sign, an element, and if it's for a man or woman, I think it gives a lot of context and value to anyone connecting with themselves, friends, or lovers,
And if we have some time, we're going to end with some really fun or important examples that we definitely see come up in our clients' charts a lot and possibly even celebrity charts. So let's go ahead and dive in. Is there anything you want to add to that actually before we do that?
Definitely just dropping into Venus, what it represents, how this video could help you is looking at your own personal Venus and how we outreach our hand in connection with people. And so Venus, we can drop into the whole show, but it's really about like how we connect not only to one another, but also how do we harmonize and feel the sensuality and the beauty that wants to correlate within relationships in itself. So it's wonderful. You got a Sag and Gemini, me and Courtney, out here to just kind of start the first little launch pad of us doing a whole kind of show interview and kind of bring some details to create more of a harmonious world. So that's my little 2 cents.
All right. So let's start off by talking about what is Venus. Well, Venus is obviously a planet,
Right.
like everything we talk about
Venus,
in astrology.
Not everything.
Not everything, but primarily our focus. And I mean, it has a lot of meanings. Today, we will be primarily focusing on the love aspect of Venus, the way we harmonize with other people or attract other people. Venus has a lot to do with physical beauty, material beauty in the world around us, as well as our beauty. And of course, money. That's a really big
That
one.
too.
So what other kind of Venus significations do you see come up in people's charts, Ricky?
Just a lot of things like you said, but Venus is also not only just how you harmonize with social groups, how you make money, it's also like what makes you feel good just in the 5 senses and even just in your own comfortability. If Venus is just not getting taken care of, you can feel a little lifeless. So I feel like Venus is a great way to kind of spark not necessarily just enthusiasm, but also just feeling at home with yourself, just like connecting with your own personal flower. And that goes even for men or women, but just your own, really the feminine energy that lies within all of us that wants to kind of be a little chaotic, crazy, and express itself and connect with the world.
I love that you use the word flower because I will pop up a picture on the screen of what Venus's orbit looks like, and it actually makes this really beautiful flower in the sky. And so I think that this is just a perfect example of the kind of beauty that Venus can bring into our lives, as well as like the artistic nature of Venus. You can see this really predominantly in people's charts that are maybe jewelry designers or interior designers or people who are just really interested in like the aesthetic of their environment. So
If I may, I think it is Beyonce that she might be a Virgo, but she has the most aspected Venus full blown in her chart. So you want to see some active feminine energy, like she is embodying that.
I think it's on her ascendant as well.
It's on the descendant or the ascendant, I believe. I believe it's the descendant. I think that in Libra. And another thing I'd like to share actually about Venus on a scientific and an ancient level is that the Mayans knew that Venus is the best calculator to copy. It is one of the great benefics. It's not the great benefic like Jupiter, but it is a benefic where it's the shining brightest light in the sky. So Venus, wherever it lies, if it's in a retrograde in the morning or the evening, also can entail where kind of the great benevolent parts of your day can be. So that gets a little bit nitty gritty, but it's definitely going to shine on like where the times the relationships are most active, actually. Is it in the morning or at night? And also, like, I think to get back to what the Mayans were looking at, every 8 years they can calculate it was the most accurate planet that could be looked at. So with that, maybe you showed a little pie chart of that, but like there's a lot of significations of how Venus can go in your chart. Definitely noteworthy for everyone in their aspects of all relationships. So
I actually do have Beyonce's chart on here, and
boom.
she's a Libra rising. Her Venus is exactly on her ascendant.
Okay, cool.
Selena Gomez as well. Her Venus is on her ascendant. And what do people
Libra.
say about these people?
Boom.
They're very likable. People tend to really gravitate towards Selena Gomez and Beyonce. And the ascendant is a lot about how the world perceives you. And so with Venus on there, the planet of harmony, you tend to going to have a lot of friends. People are going to think you're attractive, or at the very least kind and amiable. So it's going to just create like a really lucky person in terms of their relationships. Not always going to be the case, but in general, people are going to be much more attracted to someone with Venus on their sun, Venus on their ascendant, or in a really predominant part of their chart.
There's many aspects Venus can show up, and I will say I've known a couple people with the ascendant, even if it's not. Especially for females, and especially Beyonce with the Libra situation, that's super flower Venetian kind of. I would imagine like just speaking with them is gonna have like an elegance and a soft petal-like tone, kind of with their own vibe. I've met a man though, like masculine energy with Venus on the ascendant, definitely the ability to connect with almost anyone, and just happen to be in Gemini. And I'm talking about one of the most articulate connecting people that I don't know a human they might not be able to connect with. So Venus really wants to kind of like harmonize with the world, so to speak. And so just to bring that back.
Yeah. And we'll see that also with positive aspects with Jupiter, or, I mean, I guess it just depends on where it is in your chart in general.
Couple
With the
things.
moon, there's quite a few things
Totally.
that could make someone really social, that people enjoy them.
Even Uranus, Uranus and Venus trine is epic too. Like these people know how to network, make friends, electrify a group at a party, and bring in people and resources and jobs that no one knew how to do. And if you're looking for someone, Venus is that's why it's a benefic planet. So
Yeah, so let's actually break down what is benefic when we're saying that.
I like that. Yeah, I really appreciate that. So benefic, when we use this term in astrology, benefic is really about like it's positive. It's embracing. It's benefic is actually, you could use the words lucky, but it's a more positive, harmonious tone that's bringing more energies of that planet in a more positive place, where then it would be kind of malefic, whereas the opposite is usually a little bit more harsher, constructively, like for your personal growth. It's not soft, it's not fun. Benefic would be easy, playful, and fun, so to speak. Malefic could be like harsher, dirty work to kind of get done in an abbreviated
Yeah.
phrase.
So Saturn and Mars are the malefics that create that level of challenge, adversity, and discord between people and in our lives. And then Venus and Jupiter create opportunities, harmony, growth, romance, things that we typically enjoy. So if you want to look for the blessings in your chart, I always tell people to absolutely look for their Venus and Jupiter. It's not always going to be the case that they're only giving blessings, but generally that's where you're going to have things come to you in your life with greater ease, and it brings you greater sense of happiness.
Not to also to note, like, a lot of other malefics could be like, Pluto. Some people argue, I think Neptune can be a huge malefic too, and even the sun in some places. But what I like to say is that when these come together, it's not just, it's a basic form. If you were looking on a daily chart, benefic would be like, oh, this is really positive it's easy to go to a good party. It's easy to make good friends. Conversations with a lover might go very well if it was benefic, so to speak. And then malefic is kind of like, actually, we're having some really big transformative conversations. We're having some really big career pivots. We have big decisions or maybe trauma to deal with, So malefics, the thing is though, Venus, when it works with any of these, even malefics, I find is always leaving a jewel to whatever is being brought up. So even with Saturn, I've had a relationship with Saturn and Venus trine, super malefic, super benefic, if you will. They're now creating a structure for each other. So there's something always beautiful to be created with Venus, in my personal opinion, unless it has a really aggressive aspect. And this is not the energetics of the planet. This might be like a square opposition, a deeper kind of chemical reaction that can make Venus have a difficult time. The princess doesn't really get to go frolic free in the field. She's kind of in a tower with a dragon awaiting situations.
Yeah, I have a really close friend that I love so much, and she has an exact opposition with Saturn across from her Venus. And Saturn is a planet that restricts, and whenever it's in contact with Venus by transit or natally, we tend to feel like the love and support that we need from people in our lives is absent. So, for example, I went through Saturn squaring my Venus at a time in my life when I just moved somewhere new. I got super sick, was completely alone. I had zero support system. I had the thought if I died in my apartment, no one would find me for days. No one would even know because I just didn't know anyone there. And that's that kind of feeling that when you have that natally, the opposition or the square with Saturn and Venus, you can feel like love is really restricted. You can feel like it's hard to meet people that are really giving and that you can trust and that you can just really develop relationships with. So it's really important. I want to kind of segue into why should we look at Venus? And I think that is such a good example of why, because you can kind of see how maybe some reasons why you struggle with certain things in relationships and maybe where there needs to be some healing. So why else do you think we should look at Venus?
I think looking at Venus is huge importance. Like, basically, and it does depend. We're going to get into this, but kind of like from male to female, it does matter very differently on how Venus affects someone's chart. But, especially for me, where Venus is where you're really going to be able to like feel your creativity. You feel this kind of more romantic side of life, being able to really let in your five senses and like literally feel good, actually, because Venus is like bringing us what feels really good to be in. Hey, even nice cars rule Venus. Making money rules Venus. To be honest, getting a massage with like expensive oils is Venus. Even just smelling flowers and having a great day with friends is very Venus ruled. So it really, when you look at someone's chart, it's really valuable to know that whatever the sign it is where it's kind of wanting to be expressed. The house can also tell you where dimension is this getting a lot of attention. But it also really gives most context to how not only are you going to be able to be relatable with for your own chart, but in a relationship, Venus is helping you understand what is the kind of main love language that this person feels the most at home. Because we all can feel differentiations of all the signs of what love and connection is. But I won't lie, Venus and Aries might feel love and affection very differently than Venus and Cancer or Venus and Taurus or something like that.
Yeah, and we're about to break that down in just a second. I did want to mention one other thing. If you can find the house that starts off with the sign of Taurus or Libra, so people who have their ascendant or their rising sign at Taurus or Libra, this will be especially important for you. Those houses are governed by Venus, which is something that Ricky was just talking about. So for example, if your ascendant is Taurus, Venus is going to actually describe more about your personality and the way you make decisions and the way that people view you and even your purpose and life path. If you have Libra or Taurus on your descendant or the start of the seventh house, you will see that that's actually your relationship planet. So of course, Venus is always going to be a relationship planet in anyone's chart, but then the start of the seventh house, so the descendant or the cusp sign, is going to also be a relationship planet. So for some people, Venus will be both of those things for them. And that will be especially important in describing the kind of partner that they attract, the kind of luck that they have in relationships. And so if you can just kind of look at which house it rules, then you can begin to uncover more about the state of that house. And that's why when people ask, oh my gosh, help, I don't have a planet in this house. The house is empty. What does that mean? It's like, just look at the planet that rules that house, and that will give you the context and the layers.
Very true.
So yeah, so that would be another reason that we want to dive into Venus, besides just relationships, is to better understand the context of other things in your chart.
I want to talk about this. So, like Venus, so in this context of what Courtney's talking about, Venus has a rulership, and that is Taurus and Libra. To even get more, this means that if Venus is Miss Aphrodite, Miss Princess Venus, she's sitting at home in a throne room in Earth, in air, for Taurus in Libra. And to break it down, Taurus would rule the physical properties, the little bit of materialism within the feminine, but it allows things to be felt, smelled, tasted, heard, that are all of sensual beauty, of high quality beauty. When it's in Libra, it's now more in this kind of romantic connection, more kind of an actual personal relationship. I almost think of dancers. I always think of the masculine feminine dancing principle. Many of us have disconnected with. We should all be reconnected with that. But that allow this energy of how we relate with people and beauty in general. So by those two rulerships, now we can use Venus to really understand, because everyone's chart has this, of where they're being aspected and alive in full in where they're trying to show up for us. So even if you don't have a planet in Libra or Taurus, the house that those show up in is also going to reveal where that aspect of Venus is unveiling itself. So I just kind of want to bring some context there.
Yeah, and just to give a little bit of an example to help you guys see what that means, I had a client, for example, that Venus was one of his relationship planets, but it also ruled his fifth house. So one of the issues that came up was actually because Venus was having some difficult aspects. One of the issues that came up was that his like music career was getting in the way of his connections. So he would find that none of his partners supported his music career, which is really typical for fifth house topics. And so it's like that became a clash. So the way that the fifth house was tied into his relationships through the sign of Taurus or Libra or whatever it was, can show a lot about like some of the issues you can see in the relationship, good or bad, coming to play.
Yeah.
All right, so let's dive right into Venus and all of the signs then.
Yeah, I'd love
actually, wait, before we do that, should we talk about male versus female since we haven't
Yeah, we definitely should context that. So, I mean, there's a lot of ways this can be aspected. For a man's chart, when you see Venus, this is actually a connection to one. And this is also, just if you're a dominantly masculine or feminine, it's however you identify. But I just want to say that, like, for normally in the masculine, when I look at my Venus, this is how I connect with my creativity, my femininity, and how I actually get to kind of like feel good and transpire into my environment. Where am I actually wanting my relationships to feel at most flourishment? But in corresponding, I definitely want Courtney to touch on this, but when I see it in a female's chart, it's much more of actually the kind of permeating radiance that is coming from the femininity. It's almost like the femininity is being expressed where this Venus is for the feminine, but in the masculine, it's almost kind of like, even in a way, what we might be most attracted to, what kind of feminine energy is kind of like most alluring, if you will. There's a lot of context though that can go up and down, but for the most part, I feel that.
Yeah. So, I mean, obviously we're going to, again, say it's kind of whatever you identify as. We're not trying to put everyone into a box, but in terms of male and female, I'm just going to kind of say it like that so you guys understand. But yeah, so definitely Venus for the feminine has a lot to do with her comfort in her own femininity and sexuality. So the moon will also represent this as a woman to some degree, but I definitely see this. For example, I had another client who had Venus conjunct Chiron, which is an asteroid of childhood wounding. And that's definitely something immediately that I could see was that she would have trouble with her feminine identity. So anything kind of happening to Venus can show a lot about where she might restrict herself, even physically, aesthetically.
Mm-hmm.
Because for Venus, it's going to show for women a lot about how we dress ourselves, how we express ourselves. So, for example, if you Venus making a square to Saturn, you might dress more conservatively, or you might be less comfortable with affection and with touch. And this could be for both men and women, but especially it's going to be enhanced for women because this is a female planet, Aphrodite, it's ruling over women. Whereas for men, I definitely agree with Ricky in terms of the physical attractiveness, like what they're looking for in a partner, what they're looking for in a relationship. And that, again, will be true for both sexes, but it's especially true for men because that's just kind of what their chart is predominantly saying, that this is my prototype or my idea of what the ideal feminine is. And for women, we also have that. This is my prototype or idea of what the ideal feminine is. And I am feminine. And this is how I identify. Or men, this is how I want my partner to look like or be like. And so I definitely think, kind of where it shows up in the male or female's chart will show a lot about what they expect and hope from a partner.
Mm-hmm. This isn't fully universal. Like, I've definitely seen people really attracted, even if the Venus isn't like fully aspected. But what I want to remind this is like, that is your love language. Like where Venus is how you want to connect with love languages, and how, as far as a male is how is like how I want to express, how I want to have a relationship actually is, and I have, Venus and fire, and there's a lot more in engagement. There's a lot more kind of like adventure and kind of there's a different way that Venus wants to express and feel love very differently than maybe Venus and water, if you will. But that doesn't mean that it's just going to isolate, like, you only go for these kind of partners. It's just making sure that when this Venus is nourished is how, at least as a male, that's how I'm going to feel like, oh, I'm really receiving the kind of feminine polarity within my relationship. And that's actually making me feel a lot more companionship and a lot more kind of affection, compassion, and adornment. So at least in a male, like, the Venus is almost kind of like, this is how to access one's love language, so to speak.
Yeah. So basically, it's not the be all end all, but it is one important aspect of compatibility,
Right.
and definitely shows how people show up and offer their love in a relationship, as well as what they best receive. Because people will offer things and it's not received as well or not appreciated as much. Obviously, that we all know that about love languages. An example for if you look at like two charts together, which is synastry, I had somebody with Venus, I believe it was in the 6th house. And so she showed up in the 6th house of her partner. And so she showed up for her partner by cooking for her, cleaning for her, doing these like
Acts of
little
service.
daily acts of service.
Yeah.
And then when I reversed them, the other person's Venus was in their partner's 2nd house. And so she showed up by giving her gifts and supporting her financially and just kind of spoiling her with food and, going out. And so I think it's a really, not just a good planet to kind of observe in our own chart, but when we create two charts together, like a bi-wheel, we'll start to see where those love languages can come up so we can appreciate our partner more and offer them recognition, because we can see, oh, theirs is acts of service in my life. Because maybe in general, they're not always acts of service, but sometimes that relationship can like ping or awaken that within them where they start offering that more. So at least kind of recognizing where your partner is trying to show up can be really helpful to create more cooperation and harmony, which is what Venus is all about.
To add more to what Courtney's saying, and I use this analogy of the flower, and I want to re-invite that again, is basically Venus is showing like how this flower wants to be watered. And that goes for male or female. And like, certain flowers all have different tones. Some are much more tropical, some are a little more arid, some a little bit more like lots of, like there's just so many different variations on the way someone would like to be watered and is blooming, and in showing how they can bloom and offer themselves. And this is just how we're correlating with love languages. And then once you can kind of understand that, we can step back from a kind of any kind of selfish way that we're looking at relationships and understand how can I really meet this plant, this relationship, this life form in a way that is going to be much more tailored or in correspondent resonance with how they've experienced love and beauty.
I
So,
love that. I love that. I
yeah.
love when people really reflect on how they can meet their partner's needs, because so many people are always thinking about how that person isn't meeting their needs,
Mm,
but I mean, depends on your chart, but most people are thinking about themselves and what they are getting rather than what they're giving, and rather than how they can show up and what their partner requires or what makes them feel most
mhm.
loved. And that's why I love doing these synastry readings and these episodes, because that's what relationships are all about, is about really the other person, and then of course
Mhm.
yourself too. But yeah.
Totally. It's a common situation our society kind of comes with, and it's taking care of ourselves first, for sure. Knowing your own Venus is how you need to be taken care of. But how are we going to like toe to dance? Like how is that going to happen? And versus people stepping on each other's toes because we're not being able to understand each other's languages. And then it can become a really beautiful experience to really see how can I really merge and understand this person's love language and then become more dancing in that kind of relationship field. So even just because one Venus or another is more compatible than the other, just because something comes easy too, doesn't always mean it's going to have the greatest rewards either.
Oh my gosh, I have a story for
Yeah.
that.
So I sometimes malefic energy is in your best interest,
Yes.
depending on the situation, of course. Like,
Absolutely. And you
yeah.
can look at anyone's chart who's extremely successful. They have some really hard aspects,
Mm-hmm.
some really difficult things going on. It's because they had to grow in resilience and wisdom through experience. And then they became successful. It's not like they just got an inheritance and it was all handed to them and then they
Mm-hmm.
just flitted it away in happiness. And I actually, it's funny because I was kind of having this friends with benefits relationship with this one guy, a little personal, but I looked at our charts together and we had super compatible charts. Like, I mean, there was all trines and sextiles and like literally there was almost nothing that was negative in the chart.
Wow.
I haven't actually seen my chart that
Lucky
compatible with
you.
someone
I'm kidding.
ever. We hit it off right away. We were good friends right away. But that was the thing though, is that we actually like the relationship just didn't work. Like we both decided we were too different, which is interesting because we had really compatible charts, but we both knew we were too different, and it just like it wasn't healthy. It wasn't good. Just because you have a trine doesn't mean that it's healthy. It can be a flow of energy between two planets that is unimpeded, but it's not positive, if that makes sense. And so we
Mm-hmm.
had all these beautiful aspects, and the relationship itself was just kind of, it made me feel depleted. So you're
Very
not looking
interesting.
for a perfect chart, guys.
I've had a These are all good. So in the kind of nitty gritty is like, an element meeting an element is a trine, an air Venus to an air Venus, water Venus to a water Venus, fire Venus to a fire Venus. And I've experienced this trine. I've experienced like a 1 degree orb trine, 21 to 22. And so to break it down is like, even though that relationship went well and it was very easy, it also didn't really give enough zest, sometimes tension that actually helps inspire a little bit more of kind of like tenacity and passion. So there's a lot of things to get into on this, but I'm really excited to jump in. I think we've touched a lot of details and, just all moving forward to how these might look in for your chart and a close someone's chart.
All right, let's jump now into Venus and all the signs, which I'm sure you guys are super curious about. Starting off with Venus in detriment in
Boom.
Aries. What do you have to say about Venus and Aries?
Two things.
What is detriment, first of all?
Nothing to say at all. No, I'm playing around. So detriment, that sounds like a dirty word right now. We need to clean that up a little bit. Detriment just means that if Venus was this Aphrodite little princess, she'd rather be in the land of Taurus and Libra, as we spoke before. And Libra would definitely be about like kind of like art, music, very flowers and scents and everything's peachy cream. But when we go into the God of War house of Aries, we have Venus now in a very different aspect. And so when it's considered detriment, it just means that like the Venusian energy is not really expressing itself at full capacity here. But hold on right now. This does not mean that the femininity energy is not there. It just means the way it's expressing itself is maybe in a much more Martian kind of way. Now, when I think of Venus and Aries, though, I definitely think of someone with a Ferrari. And I think of someone that's like ready for a hot date and they're ready to go out and they know what they want. They engage in it. They almost take relationships a little bit like a challenge. Challenge is almost like an attractive thing for them.
Like they like the pursuit. The
Pursuit
chase.
sometimes is a little bit of competition, but there is a pursuit that makes it kind of like this kind of, and it's in the fire sign of Aries. So it's like got a lot of passion and drive behind it. The biggest thing about detriment, though, is making sure that sometimes Venus and Aries can be a little selfish. I honestly got to say, like, sometimes you got to check yourself before you wreck yourself. But Venus and Aries has a ton of energy and passion that is contagiously giving off leadership to everyone around it. They almost always will be in a leadership role when I've seen Venus and Aries. The other little detail I like to add if it's in detriment is just to make sure that you don't burn yourself all the way out, like full floor that Ferrari on the first gateway out the door. And so sometimes I've seen Venus and Aries get pushing relationships too far, getting too excited about the relationship without putting in a little bit more of the earth, or however you interpret this, groundedness, to letting the relationship be more long-term than just a nice fling. You need to put in that dedication because, we can feel a lot of passion for someone all at once, but are we willing to put in that work to dedicate and commit and take care of this plant? It's not just going out and having a great time. That's all great, but making sure that Venus and Aries can really recognize where it might be, thinking only about itself, thinking about only satisfaction or the challenge or however, and let them know that this needs to be a candle to be stoked for a long time, so to speak.
Yeah, you guys. I have a few friends with Venus and Aries. I
They're
don't
great.
know. One of them definitely is not. She likes to be more behind the scenes. She's a Pisces, so she definitely doesn't like the whole leadership role thing. I think maybe the leadership or the dominance could come out in partnerships though. Like where, hey, I'm going to be the one to pursue or make the first move or